This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. A lot to get to today. If you stayed up for it, you saw the Vikings get pummeled 24-7 on Monday Night Football. An opportunity lost. They go to 1-1 on the season. Not the end of the world, but we'll get into all of the bad things we saw in that game, some of the things they will need to correct going forward, and just frankly, just a resetting of expectations very early in the season. We'll get into that as well. Randy Johnson covers Gopher football for the Star Tribune. Will join me here in a little bit as well. Big news out of the Gophers over the weekend. Dual news. One was really good. They beat Colorado 49-7, but unfortunately lost wide receiver Chris Autman-Bell to a lower right leg injury in that game, and confirmed on Monday that he is out for the season. So I'll talk to Randy about kind of who has to step up in the place of Autman-Bell, who will be gone for the rest of the year, and Gophers starting Big Ten play this week at Michigan State. How does that step up in class correspond to how they might fare in this season when they've already gone 3-0 against lesser competition? And need to get to the Twins at the end of the show, and just the unofficial official end of their season. They get blown out by Cleveland 11-4 on Monday, end up losing 4 out of 5 games in that series. So that is not officially over, but for all intents and purposes, that is over. It was an okay run for them, propped up by a bad division that's still not very good, but losing 4 out of 5 in a series where you needed to probably win 4 out of 5, yeah, that will do it for the Twins. But first, what did I miss? We got to get back to the Vikings. Got a whole bunch of notes written down. I've gone back and forth on this team a lot already for a 1-1 season. Maybe 2 months ago, I was feeling pretty good about the Vikings. I looked at them and I was like, you know what? Relatively soft schedule, a lot of offensive playmakers back, new system, new schemes, just the fresh start. I thought that would maybe get them into a 9 or 10 win season and carry them forward. My opinion started to change a little bit during camp when I just saw their depth and got a real better sense for who some of the backups were on this team, how they were going to be able to approach things if they didn't have their frontline players. And I just got kind of worried. I was like, A, I don't know how the depth stacks up, and B, I don't know how this defense with a lot of veterans who were getting older, learning a new scheme. I just didn't know how that defense was going to hold up. So I predicted they would go 7-10 at the start of the year, and people were like, that's too negative. Some people were like, hey, right on, but a lot of people were like, that's too negative. This is a better team than that. And a lot of my colleagues didn't say that, of course, but they had different predictions. So they go and win their opener 23-7 against Green Bay, and I'm like, well, they just flat out looked better than I thought they would look. So going into this Monday night game, my sentiment was, if they could win this game as well, then my opinion had to fully change of them. They were suddenly going to be, not just 2-0, but 2-0 with really good wins, 2-0, with the chance to then, be in fairly good control. Like 10 wins in a season, a 17-game season. After you win your first 2, you really have to go barely over 500 the rest of the way. And if you've won those 2 games, that doesn't seem like a big stretch. So I thought that if they could win that Philadelphia game, all of a sudden the conversation would change. Well, folks, they did not win that Philadelphia game. They looked, unfortunately for Vikings fans, unfortunately for the organization, very much like the frustrating, inconsistent team that they have been the last few seasons. It's really, you can draw any kind of line from when that starts, but a lot of it probably started during the beginning of the Kirk Cousins era, and it's certainly not all Cousins, but once they spent that kind of money on a quarterback, the roster imbalances only got more pronounced, and then the defensive players kept getting older and older, and not a lot of people came in to replace them. So it just felt like the same old, which was disappointing, right? You had this whole notion that things were changing. And on Monday Night Football in primetime, where Kirk Cousins has struggled mightily, things looked very familiar. Cousins throws 3 hideous interceptions. I think the first one looked like it was more Justin Jefferson's fault than Kirk Cousins' fault. Cousins was expecting Jefferson to run a slightly different route, but that came at a big point in the game, right? It was 24-7 at halftime, and there's, anytime along the way in a game, there's going to be moments that change momentum. The one big one was Irv Smith dropping what probably would have been a touchdown on a long pass from Cousins when it was 21-7. Vikings, that drive ends up stalling. The Eagles wind up getting a field goal at the end of the first half to go up 24-7. But the Vikings kept Philadelphia off the scoreboard in the second half and certainly had their chances to score. That's when all 3 of Cousins' interceptions came. A couple of them were like kind of late. You're like, are they really still in it? But he throws the one when it's 24-7 pretty early in the third quarter. I believe it was the first drive of the third quarter, and they're finally starting to find some rhythm, changing the tempo a little bit, going some no huddle. And you just have that, whether it's a miscommunication, whether it's, Jefferson went one way that he wasn't supposed to. Still felt like it was a contested area, but I'm not putting that one all on Cousins, but still a big turnover at that point in the game. Then the Vikings get a blocked field goal later. Patrick Peterson, great blocked field goal. The special teams has been very good all season. Looks like that could be, maybe a strength of this team, or at least has been so far. Good punting. The field goal unit seems like it's got itself together. They didn't have to do much in this game, but the game before against Green Bay, and then, of course, the blocked punt. That's a huge play. Momentum changes. They move the ball, and then again, another interception. Cousins just threw, aside from the 3 picks, he threw a few other balls that were certainly turnover-worthy plays. And, it's just really discouraging, because you hear Kevin O'Connell talk about Kirk Cousins. You hear him talking about how things are different. You hear him talking about how he wants Cousins to play with a, quote, quiet mind. That's been his big discussion point a long time. Play with a quiet mind, which kind of means, have it just kind of just flow through you and just be calm, be relaxed, play with a quiet mind. Hey, Daily Delivery, by the way, has obtained exclusive audio footage of what it sounded like inside Kirk Cousins' mind on Monday night. So let's listen to that. Definitely not a quiet mind Monday night. He looked amped up. He looked fidgety. He did not look calm. He did not look in control as much as he did against Green Bay. The whole team was not as crisp as it was against Green Bay. They committed some penalties. They jumped a couple times, just things like that. And again, different environment, right? You're not at home. You're not controlling your environment. You're on the road. It's a hostile place. The crowd noise is loud. It's a night game. There's a lot of different environmental things. It's on grass. A lot of things about it were very different. And I think Kevin O'Connell wanted to get a sense for how his team would respond to that. That was kind of the narrative going into the week. Would they be able to kind of continue that momentum, feel like they were still in a good place? And that certainly was not the case. Certainly was not the case in this game. O'Connell afterward tried to take the blame himself, and I see some of that. Let's listen to what he had to say first.
But when I look back on tonight, ultimately I think I put this one on me. I put this one on me. I don't think I did enough for our team in game, and obviously I think our plan. We felt good about our plan. They did some things defensively, and just seemed to kind of push us to the point where we just needed to make that 1 or 2 plays on a drive to kind of get going and see if we could potentially finish and kind of capture that momentum. And then ultimately, just as a football team, although our defense and special teams with the blocked field goal, defense with forcing a turnover there late, just to try to help us try to get going. And ultimately, we weren't able to capture that. And like I said, you got to give Philadelphia a lot of credit. But ultimately, I do mean it. I do feel like this one's on me. And I told our team that, I'm going to work like crazy to make sure that this does not happen again. And I have no doubt we'll be prepared and ready to respond like the way I know we will.
And I think coaches will do that just in general. They'll try to take the fall when things go bad. At least the good coaches will. They say, that's on me. I've got to do a better job. And I think O'Connell in this case probably is being sincere, because I didn't like I didn't like a lot of the game plan. I didn't like a lot of the schemes. I thought a lot of it was kind of garbage, frankly. I thought they were unaggressive. I felt like, we've been told all of this about they're going to scheme guys open. There's going to be all this pre-snap motion. There's going to be kind of this, a lot of these kind of gadgets going to create these separations, create these small edges. I just did not see them gaining a lot of small edges. There was very little separation. Justin Jefferson was covered all night. I mean, Darius Slay was great in that game, but he was covered all night. Adam Thielen had very little space. They just did not seem to be capitalizing on whatever edges they were gaining in that game on offense. And then on defense, I thought they were way too conservative in the first half. I mean, Ed Donatell's defense is kind of designed to, bend but don't break to a certain degree, kind of in this big shell, leaves the middle of the field very open. And against someone like Jalen Hurts, against an offense like Philadelphia has, where you can't just take away one thing. He's going to have a lot of different things he can do on a given play. He's going to have a lot of different, places he can go with the ball. He can tuck it. He can hand it off. He can throw it. A lot of different options for him, and he exploited those options. He was awesome in the first half in particular. 17 of 20, 251 yards, a touchdown. He ran 7 times for 50 yards with 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's a full game in one half, and he finished with 26 of 31 for 333. Eagles averaged 7.1 yards per play. I mean, that right there tells you got to be concerned about this scheme, because they're going to see, maybe not to the extent that Jalen Hurts ran it, but they're going to see offenses like this along the way. They're going to see teams that do have a mobile quarterback. They're going to see teams that are able to put them into a situation where they are going to struggle to contain in a certain way. So I did not feel like the game plan was either, very well thought out or very well executed. Whatever one it was, or maybe a little bit of both. I did not like the defense nearly as much as I thought I might in this game. But going into the year, the defense was a big concern of mine. That was one of the reasons I had them pegged at 7-10. So that concern is once again very, very valid. It put them behind right away. The Eagles scored on their first possession. I think they forced a punt on the next one, but maybe got a little fortunate with some penalty calls, some offensive pass interference somewhere in there. So, it just didn't feel like the defense ever was able to catch up really until it was too late, until it was 24-7. And, certainly, holding things down in the second half was a little bit more encouraging. The Vikings certainly had their chances to get back into the game. When Cousins throws 3 second-half interceptions from inside Philadelphia's 30-yard line, one of them inside the 10, I mean, that tells you right there, like, if they had been a little bit more able to execute a little bit better, that could have gotten a little bit more interesting, at least at the end. I never felt like they were going to get back in the game, but it could have gotten a little bit more interesting, at least in the end. But, defense and offense certainly contribute in negative ways in this game. So, where do they go from here? Where does my opinion of this team sit now that they are 1-1? I mean, I think maybe we should just take a little rest from the opinion game. I started the year at 7-10. I got a little bit more optimistic after they beat Green Bay, and I think for good reason. The evidence seemed to suggest that was a performance worthy of optimism. This one is completely the opposite. So they've got an opportunity right now. Everybody's going to be negative about them today. I'm pretty negative about them today. But look at their next 3 games: home against Detroit, neutral site against the Saints, and then home against the Bears. That's an opportunity to be 4-1 after that 3-game stretch. Let's be real. I mean, as better as the Lions seem so far, and they certainly had no trouble scoring points against Philadelphia a couple games ago, even in a loss. The Saints aren't a pushover, but that's a neutral site game, which is a big deal. That's away over in London. Then the Bears look terrible, even though they're 1-1. I don't have much confidence in the Bears. I mean, those are 3 games I could certainly see the Vikings winning. If they come out of this stretch at least 3-2, I think they'll feel okay about themselves. Anything less than that, we're going to be going, uh-oh. And I really do think there's a chance they could be 4-1 after this. And then you're thinking, okay, everybody's positive about them again. Everybody's getting back on that bandwagon. But we got to see the evidence of the things they were doing well in that first game, when Justin Jefferson was so open, when Kirk Cousins was making quick, crisp decisions with the ball, when they weren't turning it over, when the defense looked like it could handle whatever Aaron Rodgers was throwing their way. I mean, that's going to be the challenge, right? They put a game on tape, and then Philadelphia could go back and look and say, okay, this is what a Kevin O'Connell team is trying to do. This is what Ed Donatell's new defense with the Vikings is trying to do, and they can scheme against that. Now, can the Vikings counterpunch? Can they come back and now have that have that counterpunch? Have that make those adjustments now that teams can see what they do well and what they frankly don't do well. There's 2 games of tape now. One of them doing a lot of things well, one of them doing things not well. So that's going to be interesting going forward, and that's going to be kind of the difference probably between 7-10 and 10-7. How many adjustments can they make? How much is O'Connell really going to affect this? Because like we've said, this is largely the same roster, and they've largely come out of this still pretty healthy. So whenever whenever attrition starts to hit and they have to play some of the players who are lower on the depth chart, how is that going to affect things as well? But for right now, I think maybe I'm just going to sit on my 7-10 prediction and see how this all plays out.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, premixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to MGMWineandSpirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
All right, let's talk right now with Randy Johnson, covers Gopher football for the Star Tribune. Talking to Randy a day earlier than we might usually most of the weeks this year. Just kind of a strange week with the Vikings playing Monday night. You heard me talk a lot about that game already, but Randy, let's get to the Gophers. And again, we talked last week about would we find out much about this team, or would this be kind of more of the same against Colorado? And it was kind of more of the same, even though Colorado, represents, at least in name and in stature, a step up in class from New Mexico State, from Western Illinois, being a Power 5 school. It was still a lopsided affair, 35-0 at halftime before they kind of, took a little bit of the gas off. Could have been a shutout, but Colorado gets one very late after the starters leave. 49-7 is the final. Colorado so bad they issue a public apology for how bad they are. The Colorado athletic director saying, "Sorry, we're so terrible. Please keep watching," which does not happen a lot in Gophers history. So before we get to some of the bigger takeaways from the game, including the news that we learned Monday that Chris Autman-Bell, the news they fear that he would be out for the season, is in fact the case. What do you take away from that game before we get to the impact of that injury?
I take away that they were, another workmanlike game from the Gophers, but there was a little bit of an edge to it too. I thought it was pretty interesting. The Gophers score in their first series. Colorado gets the ball, and first play from scrimmage, Joe Rossi dials up a cornerback blitz from Terrell Smith, who smacks the quarterback, knocks the ball loose, and the Gophers recover. Score a couple plays later, and it's 14-0, and that was basically the ball game right there. I could not see Colorado coming back from that with the problems they have on offense and defense.
Gophers still number 2, I believe, in the nation now in total offense and total defense. They've fallen behind a little bit somehow. That 49-7 game didn't quite. I think they're behind Ohio State in offense and maybe James Madison in defense. I don't know who exactly is, but still, still looking very good. That said, we've been pointing all along to the fact that this gets a lot tougher now. They will play Michigan State next weekend. It's a road game. Michigan State has had some problems of its own. They just lost to Washington and they've struggled in the passing game, pass defense. Gophers now without Chris Autman-Bell. Let's give an update first. What did we learn from PJ Fleck on that on Monday?
Yeah, Chris Autman-Bell has a lower leg injury, his right leg, out for the season. He's going to have surgery on Wednesday. It was a non-contact play. He was going up to try to catch a pass, came down a little bit awkwardly. Looks like when he hit the turf with his knee, but he seemed to be clutching at it just before he went to the turf too. So, he felt something that seemed to be right as he was coming down. It's a big blow, and it's too bad. Really good kid. I think you ask anybody in the media who's dealt with him, and he's just a joy to deal with. Always just effervescent all the time, just smile on his face, and then great to talk to, and a very productive player. He'll be missed, that's for sure. Last year he had a ankle injury coming out of training camp, and that hampered him a bit. Missed the opener and just wasn't quite as effective for a while. Now the passing game didn't go as well without him. This year, I think they're a little bit better positioned to deal with this type of injury, quite a bit deeper this year, I would say.
Did I see that they're going to petition for a 7th year of eligibility for him?
Yeah, if Chris and his family choose so, yes, they will do. They will get that, and PJ is pretty confident they'll get it. That's what these waivers are made for. Everything's the 7-year deal. I mean, they already got one guy on the team. The 7-year guy is Clay Geary, another wide receiver. But the 7-year deal that's come about because of that the COVID year everybody was given in 2020. So normally it would be a 6-year deal, but now you get 7 with that.
That's amazing. We wrote about Monday after we wrote about the news of this, kind of some people whose responsibilities and roles could be elevated now in Autman-Bell's absence. Who do you think jumps to kind of the top of that list, or do we feel like they'll be relying on more in this case?
I would say among the wide receivers, you're going to look at Dalen Wright, Daniel Jackson, who made his season debut after an injury to start the season and missed the first 2 games, and then Mike Brown-Stevens. Those give me your main 3. Lemeki Brockington's another guy who's been getting some run lately, but you're also going to see Brevin Spanfor, the tight end, who's right now the number 2 receiver on the team. I would think that his game would be expanded too. Kirk Sherrock, the offense coordinator, looks like he's been using Brevin quite a bit this year, and I think this will just ramp that up.
Do you think this? I think they've been doing a good job so far this year. Mixing in the pass. Again, a lot of these games they've all been lopsided. They've kind of been able to do whatever they wanted at a certain point. So it's maybe, we don't really know yet what they'll call in a close game or how they'll proceed in a game that they might face against Michigan State or something like that. But do you think this changes how they approach things philosophically at all, or do you feel like they feel good enough about their wide receiver depth, their pass catching depth, that they won't necessarily change much of what they would have wanted to do anyway?
I think they will try to stay the course with what they've been doing, mixing it up. I mean, they're still a run heavy team, and they always will be. They're a run heavy, ball control type of team that likes to play the complementary football, where your offense is keeping the ball and keeping the opponent off the field, and that helps the defense. But that said, if I can see if they run into problems in the passing game, they might rely on Mo Ibrahim a little bit more in the run game. But I think they're set up a lot more depth-wise this year than they have been in the past at wideout. So I would expect them to continue to try to pass when they can.
I saw Mo, I think it was the 3rd touchdown of the game for the Gophers on Saturday. He carried you got shoved in for 5 yards. It was just the big shove for the rest of the play, but just the push. I mean, we knew how good he was, but just coming off the injury and just how impressive he's been so far this year. I mean, that play seemed to exemplify kind of everything that he does well. Yeah,
and what their line and
yes.
Receivers were blocking very well on that play. Ended up looking like a rugby scrum at the end. And
it did.
Mo kept his feet going, and he's got guys like Nick Keller up trying to drag him into the end zone, and in the middle up there's this poor Colorado linebacker who's just getting stampeded.
Does I think with 3-0, we probably would have expected them to be 3-0. I certainly would have expected them to be 3-0. But the process of getting there, has there been one side of the ball or one unit that you would say has been, whether position group, whatever you might be, that's been the most kind of pleasant surprise or anything like that? And maybe is it the offensive line, just because they had so many replacement, guys coming in that hasn't necessarily been starters, or what would you say has been something that's been even better than you expected?
Yeah, I would say the offensive line. That they lost 4 starters. They had guys with experience, some, not a lot, but some. And you've been the best guy in the middle there with John Michael Schmitz at center, an All-American, possible Remington Trophy winner this year. he's been leading that line pretty well, and it's done a good job. Now, they're going to be getting going up in class this weekend. Starting with Michigan State, so we'll find out a lot more about them. They're going to be playing bigger guys in the Big Ten.
Now, how do you think? I mean, that's a good transition point to talk about the Michigan State game here for a little while. Like we said, Michigan State had some problems against Washington. The pass defense, it seems like it's been having some problems. I mean, it seems like that would, like I said, lend this to be a game where Tanner Morgan has an outsized role, or at least, they take some shots that way. That said, we all know what they want to do ideally is run the ball. So, I mean, the approach in this game will be interesting to me, as will just what they do when they face a team that's much better than any of the teams they faced so far this year.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to see. I just think they I don't think they're gonna shy a lot away from their bread and butter. They have an identity. They're going to try to impose that will on the opponent. They always talk about worrying about how they play, not who they play.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but you look beyond this game, and the schedule, like we've talked about, is fairly forgiving, especially compared to a team like Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I think, plays Ohio State this weekend, and they've got some other tougher games on their schedule. They got Michigan. They've got some other tests that they will have to, get through. I mean, this is certainly not a make or break game for the Gophers, but there's an element of statement to be made and control really to take. If you win this game and you say that's probably our toughest game, if you're talking about from the Gophers perspective, might be their toughest game for 5 or 6 weeks. You got to feel pretty good about yourself if you win this game.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as a bellwether game for them. I always pointed to this one. It's like, okay, well, they should be definitely 3-0 going into this one. And they'll be 3-0 against teams that weren't expected to be very good. Now you're playing somebody who was a top 10 team last year. I don't know if Michigan State is quite to that level this year. I think Washington exposed them a little bit. But still, and the Gophers are even favored in this game by the odds makers. You got to go there, and if you win that game, okay, Gophers are somebody to contend in this West and contend for the title. I wouldn't sleep on the Purdue game next week. Purdue's got a couple losses, but they played people tough. That's that one won't be easy either. You look at it, Illinois is a team that beat the Gophers last year, and for some reason, Brett Bielema hasn't lost to the Gophers as a head coach. So, you can't overlook that one per se. They have a nice running game and good defense. But, this game this weekend is one that I always thought we'd find out a lot about the Gophers, and I think we will.
I think we will too, Randy. Good stuff. We'll do this again next week, likely on Wednesday, as we get back to maybe a more normal schedule with the Vikings and such. Till then, read Randy's coverage, Start Tribune, startribune.com, and we'll catch you next week, Randy.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it.
Good stuff from Randy, and I feel like the Gophers kind of have the same opportunity that the Vikings did. The Vikings gained a whole bunch of momentum with that opener against Green Bay. Everybody's really high on the Gophers right now, but everybody's been issuing that caveat like, hey, they really haven't played anybody yet. Can they go into Michigan State, a good team, but a team that, just lost to Washington? Can they go in there and be as dominant as they have looked so far, get that win? Because then all of a sudden the conversation changes. This is a statement game for the Gophers, just like it was for the Vikings. The Vikings did not succeed. Can the Gophers succeed where the Vikings did not? Let's finish with the cooler. One play exemplifying the entire season for the Minnesota Twins, actually one entire sequence, if we're going to be honest about it. It came in the middle of their game against Cleveland. That's the 6th inning. And, this game is, a last gasp of last gasp. The Twins were 6 games out going into this game. It really wasn't even realistic that they were going to get back into it. But, hey, if they win this game, then it's 5. And then you're like, okay, something weird happens. They catch fire in a week, something like that. Cleveland goes in the tank. You never know. But they had to win this game to have any kind of even faint hope of getting back into it. They fall behind 4-0 right away. Sonny Gray leaves with a mild injury, so you're thinking, okay, this one's over. But they kind of rally, right? They get it to 4-2, and then it's 4-3 in the 6th inning. And you get this sequence. Celestino singles to center. Jake Cave gets an infield single. Celestino goes to second base. Matt Wallner hit by a pitch. So now you got the bases loaded and just one out because Gio Urshela had grounded out to shortstop. So Celestino, Cave, Wallner. Mark Contreras pinch hits for Caleb Hamilton, who was in the game in place of Sandy Leon. Contreras lines into a double play. Wallner doubled off. End of the inning. So just that sequence. Wallner was just like laying on the ground afterwards, just disappointed. There's people were making memes of it on Twitter. Just the day the Twins season died, things like that. But hey, just that sequence in B. Everybody who was in the game in what was still a quasi-meaningful game in mid to late September against a division rival. Celestino, followed by Cave, followed by Wallner, followed by Contreras, who's hitting for Hamilton, who's in the game for Sandy Leon. None of these guys you could have even imagined factoring into this season in any kind of way. You might not have even heard of half of these guys before the year started, and here all of them are contributing to probably the final sequence in which the Twins had any chance at all in this season, because right after that, inning over, Cleveland scores 3 times in the bottom of the 6th. They add a bunch more later, ends up being 11-4, and you wind up with Palacios, a position player, pitching for the Twins. So there you have it. Just a sad way for this season to unofficially end. A year that had a lot of optimism, a lot of promise as the Twins, spent a lot of time in first place, but I think we'll ultimately remember that they were just probably mostly being propped up by a bad division and nothing more than that. That will do it for today. A lot more Vikings content coming up on Wednesday's show when Andrew Kramer and I will go deep on a film review. Thursday should be fun as well. Got a lot of Gopher stuff coming up on that show, so stay tuned for that. Until then, thanks for joining me. I'm Michael Rand, back at it again tomorrow.